Dozer here bringing you a new video. With Dynasty's release coming just around the corner, I wanted to give you guys a sneak peek at all of the Illusionist cards that we'll be expecting to see in the coming weeks, and to see which ones we'll want to run with which Illusionists, and see how the cards are looking up. So let's get right into it. Right off the bat, we've got Water Glow Lanterns here. Notably, it is a red 2-block Illusionist action with Go Again that says, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's red, create a Spectral Shield token. So this is pretty interesting for a couple of reasons. Normally, this would be kind of a low value card. You know, it's just going to give you one Spectral Shield token, maybe. So a lot of the time, it's not going to really do anything. It only blocks 2. But with all the new support we're seeing with Spectral Shield tokens, it might be worth it to run in a deck like Dromai, who wants to maybe just play red card to get some Go Again. Although maybe you're better off with just Sigil of Solace or some other more valuable upfront cards. But there we go. We got the yellow version. The only difference is that it makes you reveal a yellow card, and then the blue version is similar. You have to reveal a blue card to get the Spectral Shield token. So right off the bat, the blue version is going to be the most valuable for you, just pound for pound. You're really only paying the probability of getting a blue card off the top of your deck to get a Spectral Shield token. So if you're in a very blue-heavy Illusionist deck, this card's actually not that bad as a blue. It's very flexible and could get you just as much value as a blue Prismatic Shield, but costs you 3 whole resources less. The only difference obviously being an instant versus an action. So Water Glow Lanterns, not bad, but definitely is going to need to lay the groundwork for a new archetype that doesn't exist yet. Moving on, we've got the new card Spectral Procession. Spectral Procession is an attack action card for Illusionist with a undisclosed amount of attack, but 3 block, 0 cost, and is red pitch. So it says its power is equal to the number of Spectral Shields you control. That's very interesting because it's very hard traditionally to get Spectral Shields onto the board and keep them there. So having a 0 cost card that, unless you have 4 shields, you'd be better off playing a Wounding Blow, especially because this has Phantasm, is interesting to say the least. We'll see how, again, with more support and with a new archetype, potentially like a new weapon or a new hero ability, that might make getting Spectral Shields easier, might make Spectral Procession worth the downside of Phantasm. I'm specifically thinking that if this card has 6 attack, it's a good rate because of the Phantasm drawback, which means you need to have 6 Spectral Shield tokens, which is traditionally very difficult. So we'll see if this card slots into a deck like that in the future. And it will obviously be helped by the 3 block. But moving on, we've got Spectral Prowler. Spectral Prowler is a attack action card for Illusionist that has Phantasm, and it's a 0 for 4 red 3 block. So Wounding Blow stats. But with Phantasm, and the downside is alleviated by the upside. So when you play this, if you control a Spectral Shield token, this gains Go Again. Now, that's awesome because right off the bat, Go Again kind of cancels out the downside of Phantasm because they're worth about the same. So by just having a single Spectral Shield token, you've got a 0 for 4 Go Again. And that's pretty good, especially on a 3 block. So Spectral Prowler, pretty solid. Like to see that. The yellow is 3 and the blue is 2. I would not expect to see the 3 and 2 to see a ton of play. But, maybe there's an Illusionist that cares about having the Go Agains, and that might make them more appealing. At the same time, Spectral Prowler would probably work well with a card like Transmogrify from Uprising. So because it's low base power and it's innate Go Again, it might work really well with that. Moving on, we've got Phantasmal Symbiosis, which is a yellow 1 cost, 6 power, 3 block Illusionist attack that says, when this attacks, name a card. Cards with that name are Illusionist until the end of the turn with Phantasm. Now, this card's very interesting for a couple reasons. First off, when you play this, you can call the name of an attack action, maybe like Command and Conquer, or maybe something like Ninth Blade from the Runeblade class, or Runic Reclamation, something like that. And because that card is now Illusionist until the end of the turn, if you read Phantasm, it says Illusionist attack action cards with 6 or more power don't work. So if you call this on their Phantasm breaking card, instantly you have basically removed Phantasm from this card for the whole turn, and for all other things that they would have used that to pop. So Phantasmal Symbiosis is very good in that respect as a basic level of value. But on top of that, you also have the ability to synergize with your own cards. Prism specifically in the Living Legend format that might be coming out before we know it, or the next Prism, who knows, like in Blitz or something, can use Luminaris to give this go again very easily. It fits perfectly into Prism's cost curve as a yellow 1-cost attack with Fortune Herald stats. We love those. And you can call the name of your own cards. So for instance, you could say Snatch or Command and Conquer. And all of a sudden, Phantasmal Symbiosis is giving them the benefit of the Luminaris go again without giving them Phantasm, which is really powerful as far as synergizing with a lot of these cards, these generics, or even light cards, right? Any non-illusionist card that you would have wanted to run or to have go again, Phantasmal Symbiosis helps bring that bridge over by helping them get the benefit of the Luminaris. So that's very powerful right there. And I'm really interested to see how that goes. Yeah, that card's really sweet. And again, for like Prism in a Luminaris context, it's like perfect, right? It's a really, really sweet card. So we only get the Majestic. We only get 3 copies of this. We don't have a full cycle of red and yellow and blue, because that would be nuts. So moving on, we've got Spectral Rider, which is a cycle of red, yellow, and blue. Obviously, they drop their attack power for the pitch as a trade-off. And their ability is, when you play this, if you control a Spectral Shield, this gains Overpower, which means that this card cannot be defended by more than a single attack action card. So it's kind of like Dominate, where instead of only 1 card from hand total, this is 1 action card. So they can still use defense reactions freely to block this, but if all they have is a bunch of action cards in their hand, they don't have any D-reacts, this card just comes in for 8 Dominate with Phantasm as a 3-cost, which is pretty solid. But the only problem with this card is that you have to control that Spectral Shield, and Overpower is weaker than Dominate. So while it's a very interesting, just solid value card, playing this instead of a Phantasmaclasm might be kind of a hard ask. But we'll see. You know, this card seems to have a good baseline of value, and I really love the artwork specifically. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out in an archetype where you're trying to maybe build up Spectral Shields and then throw like 1 big attack and just try and like trade back and forth that way, compared to Prism, who had a much more dynamic type of game plan. And then we've got the Tome of Ao, which was my spoiler card, so thank you LSS for that. The interesting thing about these types of auras with Ward that pop themselves that we've seen is that currently there's not a lot of support for them. Currently, a lot of these cards are restricted by their ability to get out efficiently because of their 1-cost, lack of go again. You can't just maybe have a hand of 3 of these and a blue card, play all 3, and then end your turn and then draw 3 cards if you block, right? It's not quite like that. And even so, you know, spending a card to draw a card later is kind of a tough ask in this game, especially because with Ward, you're not guaranteed to draw that card, right? But a card like this with a lot of defensive tools would be very powerful. So I think we might be looking forward to the future where we'll see more defensive cards come out for Illusionists that help them protect and trade off these wards and get value off the pops of their various cards. And with all the maybe higher number of Spectral Shields, it might be easier to protect your Tome of Ao. And people might start using Spectral Shields more as expendable armor pieces rather than the offensive tool that they used to be for Prism. Because without Luminaris, you can't use your Spectral Shields attack for free, right? So I think they might be moving towards that way to give Illusionist access to way more Spectral Shield generation, because you can no longer leverage them as effectively offensively. So I think we might be looking into more of that space. To go along with that, right, we've already gotten some new cards that make Spectral Shields. So Blessing of Spirits lets you pay 1 to, at the start of your next turn, if this survives, and you don't take any damage for a turn, you get 3 Spectral Shields. So it's kind of like a guaranteed pay 1, heal 1, but maybe you heal 3. That's not amazing, right? Because you could play a card like Sigil of Solace for 0 cost at instant speed and heal 3. But this gives you effectively armor, right? Spectral Shields are effectively armor. So having Blessing of Spirits in red, yellow, and blue might give you plenty, depending on your action point economy, ability to start just generating a lot of extra HP that is very hard to get rid of because Spectral Shields, right, they won't pop unless you are still taking damage. So, you know, if I have 20 Spectral Shields, that's basically 20 extra HP. And there's no real downside to having all those. So that'll be very interesting. Obviously, if they, but there is that one caveat where if they're using something like Tiger Stripe Shuko or Storming Gloomveil, then if your opponent decides to attack you with something that doesn't let you prevent damage, all of your shields will die. So that can be a really big weakness for these Illusionist cards. But then we go to Tranquil Passing, which is another aura. So this theme, there is this theme of the ward 1, right? They stop 1 damage, optionally, right? It's mandatory, stops 1 damage if you would take it and then destroy it. But if it stays around, this one lets you banish a target aura until this thing leaves the arena. So as long as you keep this out and you don't take damage, your opponent loses their Mount Heroic. They lose their Channel Lake Frigid. They lose their, they might lose their Spectras, right? But the problem with Tranquil Passing, right, is again, it doesn't have Go again, and it has that ward. So if you have this out and your opponent is able to do any damage to you at all, you lose this, and then they get their aura back. If you didn't remove a token, they then will get their aura back, because the token will be kind of like banished into thin air, like a rune chant or something. But like if you remove their Channel Mount Heroic and you give it back to them, well, now it's lost all of its channel counters, so it's easier for them to maintain it, and you've kind of given them a free Mount Heroic back. So Tranquil Passing in that way is interesting in a very slow format, maybe, where you want to remove value from an aura, like the Looming Doom card that Runeblade's got. But beyond that, I think Tranquil Passing, at least for now, looks to be more of a card for a different meta than the one we've been seeing for a while. The yellow does 2 or less, and the blue is 1 or less. I could see the blue being decently useful to remove things like tokens or other Illusionist auras, but at the same time, I think this general math on the cards is pretty underwhelming, and it'll take a lot of critical mass of defensive tools for these Illusionist cards to see a lot of play in a competitive list. Because of that, we can go now to the equipment. So we've got Wave of Reality, which is the new Illusionist arm equipment that is different than the Dreamweavers that we got from Monarch. And these say that when this is destroyed, create a Spectral Shield token. And the only way it's going to be destroyed is if its ward is broken. So if your hero would be dealt damage at all, prevent 1 and destroy Wave of Reality. So this is interesting because it's basically a battle-worn 1 that gives you another piece of armor that you have, or like you're required to block with the first time you would take damage. So it's not bad, right? It's decent value on a card. The only issue is it is very hard to control when you get the value out of this. So if your opponent is going to be coming at you really quickly with a lot of damage, this is going to die really soon. It's not going to last a long time. And this seems like a very use it very early on, maybe try and establish some presence type of strategy here. That's kind of the idea I'm getting from this card. And who knows, it might be more useful than something like Dreamweavers or an Ironhide Gauntlet or Goliath Gauntlet or something, where you know what you're getting. But I think the more word you can have, the better in these type of new illusion strategies. So it might be worth running in that case. Moving on, we've got the Celestial Kimono, which is the new Illusionist chess piece, the first ever Illusionist chess piece, which comes in Majestic as well as Marvel rarity. And this is the Marvel here, the collector's edition of the card, right? But once per turn, when this or another non-token permanent you control with ward is destroyed, gain a resource. So and it has ward, right? So the way this card reads is that if you would have a aura destroy itself from its own effect, if your opponent would destroy your aura with its ward effect, or if you had your arm equipment even destroyed with ward, Celestial Kimono would give you a resource once per turn. So that's kind of interesting. It has ward itself, and I don't believe it would trigger off of itself. Oh, yes, it does. Yeah, so it does trigger off of itself. But normally you're going to be having things destroyed on your opponent's turn, and a lot of Illusionist cards that are generic are not instants. In fact, the only generic Illusionist instant is currently Prismatic Shield, which would fit into this type of identity, but it costs 3, so you'd still have to give up a card to play that. And so Celestial Kimono could be really interesting, where your own stuff pops on your turn, you'll be able to get that extra resource to pay for your, one cost cards like this one or this one, and this one, etc. So that could work out well for you. But without that, the moment this gets broken, you lose a lot of your power and you don't really get to choose when that happens. So it could definitely really bite you if you get swung at by an aggro deck and can't stop them. So this is definitely leaning towards a very defensive, very reactive type of Illusionist strategy that definitely clashes with the more aggressive cards that have been printed, and it's kind of weird. We'll see what other support they need in order to get value out of this. And we'll kind of go through a Prism roundup at the end to see what we want to use them for. So we've got the Dromai cards. We got Dust from the Golden Plains, which is a Ash card, which means that it is like the Ash that Dromai generates when she uses her hero ability, but this is a card that you put in your deck and it costs 0. And while it's in the arena, while it's in play, right, you can target it with your dragon invocations. And if you target it with the correct dragon, that dragon will not have Phantasm. Because this one specifically works with Themi, the anti-opponent's turn dragon. So if you target this with Themi, your Themi will not have Phantasm. You can freely attack your opponent without worrying about them popping it. The problem I see with this card is that it doesn't have Go Again, which means that Dromai won't be able to use this aggressively to turn on her other cards. Though she can drop it at the end of her turn, which is totally fine. And it generates you an Ash because it is itself an Ash. But a lot of these dragons so far, they don't really care if they have the Phantasm, because your opponent can just attack them themselves, and so it's gonna be hard for this to get value over time. Although you could definitely set up an interesting turn where maybe you've got a bunch of these Ashes out and you play a bunch of dragons all at the same turn that don't have Phantasm, and now your opponent has to deal with this whole wall of dragons that are really scary, and they have to wait till their turn to get rid of them, and then that's a lot of guaranteed value. So this could be really useful for Dromai. It'll be interesting to see how people are able to use these in the late game in order to overwhelm their opponent with a guaranteed wall of non-illusionist dragons, right? Like non-Phantasm dragons. Likewise, we have Vinserakai with Dust from the Red Desert. It's worth noting that Vinserakai costs 3 resources to play, while Themi, I believe, costs 2, and then Necria here, I believe, also costs 2 or 3. So I think 3. So it's going to take a lot of resources to play your invocations on these Ashes. I think the best case you could have, right, is a 5-card hand with 2 blues, and then you could play 3 of your Themis. So maybe you could make 3 Themis and have, I think it's a 3/4 stat line, so you could attack with some damage there. Meanwhile, Vinserakai, costing 3, attacks for 6, and on hit deals 3 arcane. So if you, it has 1 HP, right? So you had 2 blues and 2 Vinserakais, you could play them on your Dust from the Red Deserts, and then attack for 12, no Phantasm, and if it hits, you can do another 6 arcane, which is pretty good. But the issue obviously there is that they're easy to kill. So, it could be interesting to see that in the late game, does that come out to be worth it in the end, or is this kind of too slow to see play over what Dromai is already doing? And then obviously Dust from the Shadow Crypts is interesting because Necria makes Ash when it deals damage as well as when it takes damage. So by forcing your opponent to not be able to break Necria with its Phantasm trigger, you will be able to guarantee get some Ash back, which is some good value. And Necria's also got a big stat line. I believe it's like a 3/7 or something. So very happy to have a more reliable use of it while being offensive and to force people to give you that value back off of the Ash generation. And then kind of finally, we've got a very cool card for Prism, the legendary and Marvel variant Invoke Soraya, which is the new invocation for Prism, Light Illusionist. Until we get a new Light Illusionist anyway, it's going to be Prism. And what this card does is, just like a dragon, you can target a token that you have, such as Spectral Shield for this card instead of an Ash, and you get to transform that Ash by putting the invocation flipped on top of it and turn it into the backside. And then you get Go Again. For 2 resources, yellow, 3 block. Right off the bat, obviously for Prism, a yellow cost 3 block with Go Again. It's great. And 2 cost is perfect for turning on Luminars, so we love that. And it's yellow, obviously, so perfect for that as well. On the backside, we've got Soraya, Archangel of Knowledge, which is our 4 power, 4 health ally with Ward 4, which means that if you would be dealt damage, instead prevent 4 of that and destroy Soraya. So this is really exciting and really interesting because even though it's only a 1-up in your deck because it is legendary, as we saw from the other side here, it means you're only allowed to have 1 copy in your deck. Soraya kind of paves the way for us to see other angels joining Prism's deck. And it's really interesting because Prism normally relied on auras to develop a board state and threaten her opponents while having the separate ability to build a wall of spectral shields. So she had 2 different ways to attack her opponents with that on the board state. And now she's got a 3rd type, that being the allies. The notable thing about allies is that you can attack them and they don't have spectra, so your opponent can destroy them and still keep go again. So Soraya would be very difficult to kill if she didn't have the ally status, like if she was a Spectra, or maybe she was just like a Spectral Shield token with just the ward. But because she's got the 4 HP and the ward, your opponent has a lot of counterplay to be able to remove this, which is really important because its effect is really good. So Soraya's effect here is, well, for first off, you can pay 2 resources to attack with her. Because she's an Illusionist ally, if you have Luminaris and pitch a yellow for this attack action, you will give her go again because it's an Illusionist attack. I believe that is the correct way that card would work. And so whenever she attacks, you may banish a light card from your soul. If you do, she deals 1 arcane to any target. And that's nice because whenever she deals any damage, you gain that much life. So if she attacks and you have some soul, you can attack with her, and then boom, bam, boom, you have now given your opponent 1 damage, you've healed 1, and now you are coming in for 4 damage. And this has no phantasm. So if you attack and hit for 4 damage, you heal 4, so you've healed 5 total. And then you still have 4 HP that they have to either sink into her, or they have to break through your ward. For a Guardian, that can be very hard to do because maybe they don't want to waste a 6 power attack or something on your ally, but if they try to attack your face, then you can probably block them out and just keep getting the value out of Soraya. So yes, they can always just target her as long as Arclight Sentinel is not in play, but doing so is going to feel really bad for them and it's going to net you a lot of value. So yeah, Soraya is awesome. I wish she was a 3-of. I wish we could have more of the angels in the main deck as these ally type cards, and I hope that we see more of them. But yeah, so that's basically the entire list of all the Illusionist cards from Dynasty. So let's go take a look one more time and see which cards would Prism run in maybe the Living Legend format or maybe even in Blitz, which has been very popular in the Worlds tournament for a deck of choice for a lot of the competitors. So Water Glow Lanterns, red, I would say probably not. Prism does not like to run a lot of reds. Water Glow Lanterns, yellow. It's not bad, but I think this card does a few things that Prism doesn't like. It doesn't cost anything, so you can't get a yellow card into your pitch to turn on your go again, which is very relevant, and it only blocks 2. So even though it's got the go again, it makes you Spectral Shield token most of the time. I would say Water Glow Lantern's not super useful as a yellow. Blue, same thing. Spectral Procession. This card doesn't really make any sense for Prism because if you've got that many Spectral Shield tokens, you're already kind of winning, and you don't want to play a 0 cost card because, again, you can't get a yellow into your pitch. So it's very hard to get this go again when you're on like that low card hand, which you would have had to be if you kept your Spectral Shields alive. So I don't think this is a Prism card at all, at least with Luminaris, right? For Living Legend format specifically, or even for Blitz. Spectral Prowler, though, is pretty interesting in that if you have a Spectral Shield at all, you get go again. I think this could find its way into a Blitz Prism deck. Having a 4-attack go again for 0 cost is not bad because, again, obviously you don't need to have the yellow in your pitch, and even so, a lot of the times you're not going to have that many auras out, so being able to attack with this and to go again into attacking with that aura for free off of Luminaris is normally going to be decent. So, I think it's fine. I don't think Prism's going to love to run it in CC, though, or in Living Legend format, right? The Adult Hero format. Same thing with the other colors. I don't think this really helps the card. I think these are less playable. Phantasmal Symbiosis, though, is definitely a win for Prism. It only costs 1, which means you do get to put that yellow into your pitch, and it gives you enough resources to either pay for your footsteps to force through all of your auras off of just a single yellow card, or it lets you play another Wartune Herald or a Mirage Metamorph. So Phantasmal Symbiosis gives you a lot of power by just having the stat line that it does of a 1 for 6, 3 block. It's basically another copy of War-Tomb Herald, or you can also think about it as a yellow version of Mirage Metamorph, which is not as good, but it's still really good. So this card's really awesome. I would probably cut a Enigma Chimera, yellow, for this in the type of list that I have used to run back in CC. So in Living Legend, I think it would be very similar. This card definitely seems awesome for Prism with Luminars. Moving on, we've got Spectral Rider. I don't think Prism would really love this card. I think maybe the yellow would be worth running if it had maybe a bit more damage to it or something, but as it is, it's only 1 damage stronger than like a normal Herald, and it costs 1 whole extra. So you'd be better off just running kind of like any other card, because the one things you don't want to have happen as Prism is you have 2 copies of a card in your hand that don't inherently synergize off of each other. So yellow War-Tomb works with yellow War-Tomb, right? A red War-Tomb works with red War-Tomb, stuff like that. But Spectral Rider, yellow does not work with Spectral Rider yellow, like Enigma Chimera would. And Enigma Chimera has like the same stats, and most of the time, the overpower is not going to be super relevant for Prism. So I would say that the blue would work with the blue, but again, at that point, you're just kind of running a weird, weaker version of a card that you already have. So not super big on that for Prism, because she's so reliant on those yellows and those 2 pitch cards. Having a 3-cost card really needs to be like super strong and super worth it for her to consider it. Moving beyond that, we've got Tome of Ao. Yes, it's a aura, but Prism doesn't love this because, again, it doesn't have Go Again, so if you play this, it has to be at the end of your turn. Best case scenario, you play like a War-Tomb Herald, attack with all your auras, and then drop Tome of Ao. Your opponent maybe attacks a Spectra or something, and then you draw a card. That's not terrible, but it's also not great. Don't love it for Prism. I don't think it's super useful for her. So let's move on. It's kind of similar for Blessing Spirits. I don't think this really works for Prism because it doesn't give you that upfront value of Luminars, so you have to delay it. And also, sure, you can make some Spectral Shields at the start of your turn, which could be pretty nice, but because of the Ward 1, you're very unlikely to be able to do that unless you're in a matchup that you already were supposed to win anyway, like an Oldheim or a similar matchup to that. Prism really didn't have any issues with decks that weren't super aggro, like Runeblades or Ninjas, so I don't think this helps against them, and I feel like it's because of that reason, I just wouldn't run it. I don't think it makes it doesn't let you cut other cards, right? I think we have plenty of good cards to run that are not this. Same with the other colors. I think Tranquil Passing could potentially be interesting for Prism as a aura that sticks around, because obviously you could attack it every turn. As long as you protect it with your ward, etc., you would never have to lose it to Spectra, so that could be interesting. But at least as it stands, giving your opponent an aura back with full counters or full usefulness seems pretty weak. And it'd be really a tough ask to cut an existing card for this card, for just that benefit. Moving beyond that, we have Reality. I really don't think Prism will want to run this card. I think that you're incentivized to destroy it, to get the value out of it at a very specific time. And I think that while the card's value is not inherently bad for Prism, I think that she would rather just have that on-demand Ironhide Gauntlet block of the 2-for-1 resource, because she can do that off of either a Footsteps block or a Soul Shield block. So that would be much more appealing there. Celestial Kimono is pretty interesting, but because it specifically talks about non-permanent tokens or non-token permanents, Prism would much rather have Tunic or Vestige still, because if your opponent destroys an aura on your side of the board, you would rather have Vestige of Soul, because Vestige of Soul, like off of a Merciful, would give you the ability to play to Infinities and other auras, a lot of stuff in the same turn. This will only give you that 1 extra resource, so it's worse in that way. Obviously, the ward makes you lose it, which hurts, and yeah, you just don't have your own non-token permanents destroyed on your turn. So although it is interesting to note that Celestial Cataclysm or Celestial Kimono here works with non-illusionist cards. So if you had something like a Enchanting Melody, or if you had something like an energy potion that you broke in your own turn, this card would give you the extra resource. So that's kind of interesting. Like, it might work really well with items. And like I said, the Enchanting Melody could be really interesting, because if I had my Phantasmal Symbiosis, it lets you name any card. That includes non-attack actions. So if I had a Enchanting Melody on the board, I played Phantasmal Symbiosis, I gave it go again off the yellow, and I had a Enchanting Melody on the board, I could then attack with that with my Luminaris or whatever weapon gives my auras attack. So interesting, not bad. And Celestial Kimono there would help you get value off of that by anytime you destroy anything, like a non-token permanent. So items or auras or anything like that, you can get a lot of good value off of that. So maybe we're running. Dust from Golden Plains, can't run these cards because it's only for Dromai, because it's Draconic Illusionist. Then we've got Invoke Soraya. Obviously, we're going to make room for this, even if it's not the best card. There's no reason to not put it in the deck as a yellow 3-block. That's super cool. So, personally, I would cut something like a Parable of Humility for this. Parable's normally the weakest aura, and maybe in Living Legend format, you would want it Starbow, but I think this card is just super cool. And if I had to cut one card, I'd probably cut an aura. So there you go. All right, so thanks for watching. I really appreciated you taking the time to stop by the channel and hear my thoughts on all these new Illusionist cards. And I'll try and check out all the generic cards if there are really going to be much, or really going to be many of them out of the set. And we'll see how all the new classes and all the new cards shake up the metagame, and hopefully we get to hear about some news about Prism before too long. So, thanks for watching, take it easy, and see you guys in the next video.